Buongiorno Alberto, grazie di cuore per la tua disponibilità.
Good morning, Alberto. Thank you very much for your availability, above all, for your generosity in sharing your experience. How are you? Fine, thanks. I would like to ask you, to begin this interview, if you could please introduce yourself, your family, and also your company. What does you dedicate yourself to? How many collaborators?
Sì, io sono Alberto Ferrucci.
I am Alberto Ferrucci. I graduated in industrial chemistry. I started working in the oil industry, where I made, let's say, a career until I became a manager in this company. Then now 40 years ago, 35 to 40 years ago, I left the company and I created Prometheus, my own company that does consultancy in the world of energy and produces software specifically for optimizing the production of oil refineries, petrochemical plants, and now lately also for water management. This is my company. We are a small company. There are currently 6 of us, but we're about to become 8. We can say something about my family also. After all, we are children of people. I'm a son. I come from a family that went abroad, lived much time abroad. My mother lived in Australia for 20 years because the Italians were the ones who migrated those times. She was born in Brazil, actually, because my grandfather was a music teacher. So he was once in Brazil first, then he went to Australia. And when my father was a wireless officer, so he was from a fairly wealthy family. I have 3 brothers. But then the war broke out, and my father, a radio operator, from the first day of the war, was a prisoner in Australia for 6 years. My mother stayed with her children in a situation in northern Italy when there were Germans and partisans fighting during the war. A situation that reminds me a lot of the current one in Gaza, right? So the escapes, the burning houses. Then when we returned to Genoa, my father had become poor when he returned. Why? Because his savings and even his pension were no longer worth anything with the devaluation that had taken place. So at the age of 20, while I was at the university, I had to go to work to support my family. At 23 years old, I graduated, and then I started working straight away. They immediately gave me a position of responsibility in the company, and there I developed my personal growth. I know that you were one of these people very close to Chiara, even when the economy of communion was born. So we know from your story that when Chiara was in Brazil in 1991, she made a call to Italy, and there were some people. And from what you told me, you were in Rome in a meeting of New Humanity. So you were in the group that received this call together with Tommaso. Could you say something? It was simple. We were there because those were the days in which there was the Congress of the Economy of Sharing and the Work of New Humanity. And as an international bureau, they were organizing this Congress. And during this Congress, the news arrived, a news that shocked us. I was initially very perplexed. And to tell the truth, because it seemed like one thing, because I came from the world, of labor. Here, and Tommaso, a great sociologist, a wonderful person who was there with me, and said this can be called the economy of communion. There it was. And there came the word, and I remember that I think I had that communion in freedom. so that it would resemble communism, right? Which is something else. Because freedom means that the person remains, so to speak, the protagonist.
Protagonista, no?
If instead the person disappears and the community emerges, then it is something else. That is not the economy of communion in freedom. And Tommaso wrote a clear letter saying this thing, and Chiara immediately accepted it,
Accettato, no?
this thing. Then, after this, I remember that in those years, it was proposed to me to present myself to the Italian Parliament, and I did the electoral campaign of '92, so as not to be elected, the first of the non-elected classic. But in doing this electoral campaign, I said, well, it's a service that I can do for my country. I have a way to do it. I can do it by having my job, etc. And I saw that I could keep 3 days a week for work and go to Rome the other 3 days to be a member of parliament. So when it came out that I wasn't elected, I had not been elected, I said, what does this mean? Maybe it means that I need to use those 3 days differently. And then I wrote it to Chiara, and I told her, if you want, I can help you with the economy of communion. And she told me, of course, I would be very happy. So I began to be practically interested in building the things of the economy of communion, which at that moment had started only in Brazil, where the immediate enthusiasm a lot of people had, just as in the early Christian times, they had got rid of jewels, their jewels. They had sold lands, they had sold houses, precisely to start this project of the industrial center of the Mariapolis Ginetta, which needed to purchase land, etc.
E quindi io sono andato.
So I went to Brazil. I went for more than 10 years. Every year I went there to follow first that data center, then the one in Argentina, and then the one in Recife, the 3 industrial centers of the movement, immediately trying to divide the religious dimension from the civil dimension. I remember that all the people had given their money directly to the Focolare movement. And the Focolare movement had given an advance to buy land. I said, no, that's not good. This is not typical of the Focolare movement. No, it is from the people who gave the money. And then return the money or return shares of the company to those who gave you the money. Because this is a civil work, right? So the Esprit was born, the Esprit company, which over the years has become the largest Brazilian social company because it has 5,000 members. 5,000 members. It is the largest Brazilian company. Of course, there are two. In order to make a well-made statute, we went together with the person responsible of the zone. He took me to an atheist, a friend of his, an atheist lawyer, who made a beautiful statute in order to ensure that things were in the hands of a council, of a steering board with the entrepreneurs, etc. Of course, I also took part as a member of all these councils because it was logical that I was there too.
Di tutti questi consigli, no? Perché era logico che c'ero anch'io.
So that is how Esprit was born. The first company, along with the other first companies. But another beautiful thing was how these companies came about. companies made by women who knew nothing
che non sapevano niente
about entrepreneurship before. I remember the first time who created La Tunica, a company that made T-shirts. I don't know, I think she was a teacher, I think. So these companies, these firms, even there it was immediately evident, because Chiara had not said much about how to start firms or companies. She had trusted, in a certain sense, those like me, and not just me, there were many others. I can think of Giacomo Linaro. Unfortunately, I forget about the names of others, like François Nouveau, French. People who live in the ideal, they were already doing the economy of communion, the economy of sharing, without wanting to. So much so that Chiara, like all the things she has done, in a very communal way, that is, it was not her invention. She felt from the Holy Spirit that she needed to say this, but as an expression of a community of people who were already experiencing it. Yes, you were saying many people, many companies, Alberto, the economy sharing?
Fa nascere l'economia di comunione.
farle nascere.
Yeah, when she proposed it, she made the actual proposal, they got a little scared. I got a little scared. But how? How is it possible? There's never been anything like this. Well, let's say it can be done, no? Eventually, she handed us over and said, do it. You're the one who has to do it. So I had to think, but you have to do it. So the beautiful thing was that in this community, this communion with this sharing with the first entrepreneurs of the economy of communion in Brazil, Armando Tortelli, Rodolfo, but many others whose names I don't remember. They were doing the most diverse professions in the different cities, not always nearby.
Lì vicino, che però di cui si vedeva.
But it was clear that they really wanted to create the economy of communion, to build it, to invent it, because they had to invent it, right?
Armando Tortelli che diceva, io stavo così.
I remember Armando Tortelli saying, I was so happy with my company of 20 people, 20 staff. Now Chiara wants us to give more profits, so I had to grow, and they became 100 and 200. I went to see his company once in Curitiba. Wonderful, with all these young people that have been hired, have really grown up, and also others the same. But about this first company, La Tunica, I like the fact, they used all the friends of the folklore movement around in Brazil to sell their T-shirts. And in order to work, they went to pick up the women in the favelas. That is, the women who were there, I wouldn't say slaves, but they were people without any specific skill, without any professional skill, and therefore necessarily, so to speak, forced to live with men who were not always good people, and vice versa, of course. And so, by teaching them to work, by making seamstress out of unemployed people, there was no need to go to school. It was enough to learn to cut. That's what really made them grow as people, as persons, and made them independent. So much so that some, when they left this company, they started their own business and were, therefore, redeemed people. So here is the real redemption, true redemption from loneliness and ignorance. These are the two basic things. This came to mind when you told me about the experience you had with Chiara when you went to Strasbourg with the European Parliament. And there they asked a question, and you can tell us. And they're not only there, but what do you answer now? Because you answered something at that moment. I don't know if your answer would change after all these years. Well, it had been that in 1999, I think these were the years in which Chiara came, in my opinion, largely thanks to the economy of communion. So as it was a concrete thing, it attracted the attention of the whole world. So Chiara received 8 or 9 degrees ad honorem, on honorary degrees, including in economics, but the other degrees were also related to the economy of communion. In all the laudatio, you know, the speech, it was written that she spoke about the economy of communion. And we had also gone there, was going there to speak to the parliamentarian in Strasbourg. And she had gone there with Thomas and myself. And I remember that I don't remember who stood up, but someone who was not Italian. These non-Italian members of parliament said, but how can we believe that this type of economy can prevail over the market economy? And why? Like it were a weird economy. And Chiara told me, Alberto, please answer. And I said very simply, it is because what the economy of communion says is nothing strange. This is what we all experience in our family. Because in our family, who among us is not happier to give a gift to our child instead of buying something for ourselves? Why? Because then our child is happier, and that there is more joy in giving than in receiving, and in seeing the other person happy than being happy that we are happy for something to have more. So I just say this, and if we also apply these in the world of labor, we're no longer divided into 2 different ways of reasoning, outside and inside the family. And in those years, we also went there. Other times, we went another time when Chiara spoke in another conference, which was also linked to ecology, I remember. What would I answer now? Well, I would answer that not only does this economy make us happier and brings us together as people, it doesn't divide us, it doesn't split us in 2, but it is also the only way to survive as a planet. Because, and I'm precisely an expert in the energy sector, and I see a reason for the speeding up of climate change in recent years, much more than what was expected. And one reason is that, in my opinion, it depends a lot on the United States. And now, unfortunately, also from Argentina. That is, the fact that oil is no longer extracted by drilling into the ground to find the deposit, but by crushing the rocks in order to split them and release the oil that has melted inside and the gas that is inside. Now, this system is much more harmful than the previous one, because by perforating, the oil comes out of the pipe and goes into the tank. By splitting the rock 1 mile deep into the ground, not only the earthquakes are created, as in America, there are even in Oklahoma, which has never had an earthquake. There was even one on the Richter scale 5. But above all, this methane, which is released, it doesn't all flow into the pipe where it arrived there, but it goes into the groundwater. And then it is released into the atmosphere. And methane in the atmosphere is 80 times more harmful than carbon dioxide. And then it happens, especially in the United States, that when a well or a company does the drilling fails, or if the well is not productive enough, it is abandoned. And then the methane also comes out of the well hole without it being blocked.
otturato.
Obama had at the time asked to plug all these 2 million pipes with holes to release the methane. With this, sorry, I remembered when you told me that Chiara had also launched this economic movement at the same time, even before the EOC, which was to become an economic movement and also a political movement. Yeah, and I remember one thing that impressed me, one prophetic thing that impressed me about Chiara. When she created the political movement for unity, she said, and in that moment you could see how true it was, that is, you know, when you grasp the truth, which is at the bottom or something that seems crazy. So Chiara said, but if nations truly loved each other, if one loved another's nations as one's own, providence would arrive for everyone. Hunger would disappear. There would be peace and hunger would disappear and development would go forward for everyone. And also say ecology would continue to everyone. Because ecology is the problem of tomorrow. And because the big problem is that there is no world global authority that can force a country not to pollute. Because what do you give? Do you invade it with your army? No, you cannot. So it is really one of the problems of tomorrow's world. Thank you truly from the bottom of my heart, not only for this interview, but truly for your life, which speaks volumes, really, which is a gold mine.